It is my pleasure as ICCJ's General Secretary to welcome the editors and contributors to the most recent published book of the International Council of Christians and Jews, the book entitled Enabling Dialogue About the Land, a resource book for Jews and Christians. I thank you very much for spending time with me for this short conversation about the book. It's time to let people know a little bit more about its content. And therefore, I'm happy that you agreed for this small online book launch. But before we talk about the content of the book itself, I think people should know a little bit more about the history behind the book, because it already started, if I remember correctly, 6 years ago. And maybe, Phil, you could tell us a little bit what happened behind the scenes.
Certainly, thank you. Actually, it started in 2011, so 9 years ago, and it emerged from frequent requests or requests for help that the ICCJ received at its Heppenheim headquarters from various dialogue groups around the world, some of which had been meeting regularly, interreligious dialogue groups between Jews and Christians that had been meeting regularly for many, many years, and in some cases decades. And what they discovered was that when the topic of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict came up, that it was difficult to have constructive conversation. People that had known each other for a long time found that they were arguing rather than dialoguing. And so the ICCJ felt it would be useful to pull together a team of scholars to research what resources might be made available to address this need, which was clear all around the world. Fortunately, there had been an international project just concluded called Christ Jesus and the Jewish People Today that involved several of the people who became involved in this new project, which we called Promise, Land, and Hope. The group first met at St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia in 2011. Then in 2012 at the Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium. The following year, which was 2013, we met at Catholic Theological Union in Chicago. In 2014, we met at the Institute for Judaic Studies at the University of Heidelberg. In 2015, we met at the Swedish Theological Institute, which is related to Lund University. We met in Jerusalem at that time. And finally, a group of us met in San Antonio, Texas, courtesy of the Archdiocese of San Antonio. And as our conversations went on, we realized that we both wanted to construct a kind of curriculum for dialogue groups to use and to provide the resources for them to do that. But we also realized that we needed to have background information. And so members of our team and some invited others composed topical essays to provide more information by way of background about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And all of us involved in the project really want to thank the universities who supported us, both financially or by making their faculties available or by hosting one of the meetings of the research team over the years.
So your short overview about the history, the many years of history of the book quite clearly shows that it's not only a collection of articles giving background information, it's a result of dialogue itself that became part of the book, and different parts of the book we will talk about a little bit later. But before that, maybe Ruth, could you tell us a little bit about the articles of the first part of the book and the authors?
This is very much, to follow up on something you said, a continuation for many of us of a dialogue that had been going on for many years previously and we really wanted to be continuing the dialogues. That is very much at the core of this book, is looking for a way to put scholarly muscles and scholarly creative juices towards this practical problem. The result is not only the dialogue process, which is at the back of the book, the dialogue curriculum, but a huge number of pages, more than I had expected, well over close to 350 pages of articles, which are available for people to explore in terms of background reading about the book. So it begins with an overview of resources for thinking about the land from the Bible, one article on the Hebrew Bible, one article on the New Testament, then moves to 3 articles on the meaning of the land, one from a Jewish perspective, one from a Palestinian Christian perspective, and one from a Muslim perspective. But this isn't the beginning, this isn't the end, this is just the beginning, because there were lots of challenges to how to think about the land in both Judaism and Christianity and how to teach it. So there are 4 articles which are addressed to different aspects of challenges from different perspectives, even different methods of scholarship. We include 2 articles which are personal reflections about life in the land by a Jew and a Catholic who are both deeply involved in dialogue, but both live in Jerusalem now. And in fact, those are some of my favorite articles for teaching with from this book. And then, because this is not the end of the process at all, we have 5 more articles that are titled Creative Approaches to Christian Theology, which are people who are deeply engaged in this, including 2 of my co-editors, Phil and Jesper, who are asking, how can we push the envelope? How can we move theologies within our community about the land to a more mature kind of expression? Nobody actually can come up with a full answer, but how do we move closer to an answer? And that's the purpose of these last 5 essays, they're all Christian, but 2 of them are by Lutherans and 3 of them by Catholics. So we have some breadth in terms of Christian approaches to the land there too.
So the book offers a huge variety of different perspectives, how to think about the land, how to deal with the topic, and how to reread our Jewish and Christian traditions, and also how to deal with the ongoing discussions about the land. But if I understood correctly, this book does not only seek for readers, but is looking for users. You already mentioned the term that you like to teach from it. And I think this leads us to the second part of the book. There is didactical or educational material included based on sources. Adam, I know that you have been involved in the didactical part of the book. Could you give us some information how to use the book and what's about the educational material included?
Yeah, absolutely. I like your observation, Annette, that was in some ways our experience together with a diverse group of scholars with a range of views of their own, learning to talk with each other. It offers kind of a model, if not explicit, for the project that we had in mind, which was to make a contribution to communities that are often, I want to say, sort of Jewish and Christian groups in a city are divided or have trouble talking with each other. I should start by saying our goal isn't to try to solve the Middle Eastern, to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Right? I mean, our goal is a related one, but quite different in its in its audience and its intent, which is to help us as outsiders, deeply concerned outsiders, to figure out how to make our relationships richer, more respectful in our own communities, Jews and Christians alike. And I can certainly say in America, this has been very difficult to do. There's been a lot of disagreements between different religious groups. And so, you know, anyone who's been involved in interreligious dialogue knows that when Israel and Palestine come up, right, that this is the most difficult, one of the most, if not the most difficult issue, right? It has political complexities, of course, religious complexities in the way we relate to that place in our liturgies, in our sacred texts, in our communal memories. And of course, there are moral issues, right? Issues of justice, issues of concern for human life. So the stakes are really high for our communities in the West. So our goal was to try to aid communities in having a dialogue, ideally an interreligious dialogue in which Jews and Christians would come together and engage in text study, primary text study. They would look at a range of Jewish texts, range of Christian texts, which are sort of across the spectrum, religiously, politically, illustrating a number of different views on the land of Israel, the conflict. And so we have Jewish views from the Reform side, from the Orthodox side, Christian texts that are Catholic, Presbyterian, evangelical, Palestinian Christian. And I really would emphasize the sort of main purpose at this stage, which is sort of bring people together to study together, is to hear the views of others. That is, to have a sympathetic understanding of another community's views as illustrated in a text that a group of ideally some Christians and Jews together sitting around a table would be studying together. So it requires the participants to refrain from immediately critiquing, responding, disagreeing with the views in this or that text, but to start with hearing it. And that's hard to do. And so one of the things we sought to provide people with was kind of clear guidance, a way to have this sort of discussion. And so what we've provided are a number of primary sources and a guide that takes a group together through the study of a text. And we really emphasize just the experience of seeing what a text says, to try to figure out the words the author uses, the biblical verses that are used, how they, the authors of a text view prophecy, is it being fulfilled in our time or not, how they view covenants and biblical promises. We also asked them to consider things like the sources of authority for the authors. You know, is it Bible alone? Do they look to secular sources of authority? And then we really asked people to think about, so what's the greatest concern of the community behind this text? And to do so without critiquing that, we might say sort of that bottom line, but to do so with a real open mind. And while it's certainly appropriate, maybe towards the end of a discussion, for people to offer critiques, what we're really trying to do is to sort of cultivate a kind of sympathetic reading of views that are different from our own. And we're trying to help people do that in a structured way, because that's really hard.
So and the structured way is guaranteed not only by the primary sources included into the book, but also by the how did you call it, the mapping tool? You
The
also
meaning map.
Yeah, thank you.
The meaning.
What are the groups of people who can use it? Jesper, what are the contacts I as a user or a reader can use the materials, and what do people need to know in advance to work with the book?
hope and trust it will find its way into a number of contexts. Clergy and teachers, of course, would be interested in reading it. Community dialogue groups, interreligious groups, and also dialogue groups within the community. College courses, university courses. So the sky is the limit, because as Ruth has already pointed out, there are the genres in the book are very interesting. There are personal essays, there are introductions to Jewish, Christian, Muslim perspectives on the land. The biblical texts are analyzed, and a number of thought-provoking articles towards the end of the book. So that's what I'm hoping for, that people will listen to the voices, the choir, the numerous voices in this book, and that one will not only look for those who are similar to one's own, but seek to understand more of all these perspectives on the land.
Could I add a couple of other points?
Yes, please do.
So one thing to say is that particularly in terms of the curricular part that Adam was describing in detail, we actually field tested that in a number of different venues over the years. And one of the sort of constant experiences we had is that the participants typically arrived feeling they already knew what a member of a different religious community or a different geographic setting was going to say about the topic. And they were often surprised to hear that a voice from a community that they thought they knew was saying things that they didn't expect them to. And there were sometimes agreements among voices that one would have not thought there would be. I don't want to give any specific examples, but rather let people experience it for themselves. And this was very eye-opening for people, and it involved participants also reflecting on their own presuppositions and what was important to them and what they brought to the reading of the text. And there's an activity designed to encourage that kind of self-reflection after the process. We're also going to be making available on the ICCJ website the primary source material for group study and the worksheets that are helpful to process the primary documents, and information about that will be provided. And finally, let me just add that I think we have to say that there is no single volume that could possibly represent all of the diverse voices and topics that impinge upon the Israeli-Palestinian interaction. And so admittedly, this is a slice, hopefully not a very narrow slice, but nonetheless a slice of a whole panoply of perspectives on this conflict, which of course is one of the reasons why it's lasting for so long.
So if I do get it correctly, I think it's the same in regards to the primary sources you added to the book. It's also a selection of a variety of statements and of official resources. And I think, or I hope, and my question to you, whether you agree is that the didactic material, or the educational material, and the method you offer in the book, how to discuss sources, will enable users also to use their own primary sources from their own religious traditions or churches and institutions published in other languages and in other contexts. So,
I mean, we certainly aim to have a very wide range. And so, you know, the idea that even someone would say, Jews think this, well, actually, there are multiple Jewish texts. So it's, you know, immediately problematizing those easy assumptions. I do think that it would be wonderful if people were, for example, to use texts from their own tradition, you know, they're not represented. And one of the things I think it's a virtue of the the curriculum is that it's a model that could be applied with ease to additional texts.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you to all of you for these insights into the book, and I'm quite sure you made the audience curious, not only about reading the book, but also about using it in future. And I hope that I will have the opportunity to invite you and also some of the authors later again, maybe for a webinar or a workshop, so that we can help people to use the book. But before that, people should buy it. It has been published at Pauline's Press. It's available online as a print edition, but also as an ebook. And yeah, I recommend to read it, to use it, and thank to all of you again